You're listening to Sips of Sanity, your toolkit for emotional and intuitive intelligence, or what we like to call the dirty work. Let's do it.
Well, Kelly Sarlo, we have a wonderful guest coming back on the show for patrons again and for everybody on YouTube for the first free show.
Yep, I'm excited. She's a special guest in both of our hearts.
She is.
Yeah, Amanda Cooley is back. She is here as a yoga instructor. She's bringing her knowledge and expertise to this week's series. And we're talking about not just yoga in terms of the Western world with postures. We're actually talking about the 8 limbs of yoga. So she's educating us about how yoga is a lifestyle rather than just a class you attend once or twice a week.
She has a gentle voice, a calm way of speaking. There's education packed in there and humor. Mm-hmm. And what I really love about the shows is that everybody, you, her, and I, bring everyday experiences and ideas and explanations so that anybody can listen to the show. You don't already have to have a yoga practice or ever have attended a class. As a matter of fact, a lot of what Amanda does in the show is explain what yoga is really meant to do for us in everyday living.
Mindset, movement. I'm excited. You know, the postures are just day 3. That's it.
Yeah.
And everything else built up around that is wellness for body, mind, and soul. Off your mat.
Yeah. And if you decide you're never going to grace a yoga mat in this lifetime, you still can enjoy the shows for the lessons, the information, and just for the calmness. You know, some people listen to podcast shows to fall asleep. I swear to God, Amanda Cooley could help anybody with insomnia just fall asleep.
I think she should be charging for it. She's so good. I don't want to keep people from the show. We wanted to do this as an intro so that people know what to expect.
Yeah.
You know, you guys now know where you can find the rest of the series. That's in our standard intro. One of the things we do want to say is that this is a Zoom in, and neither of us had professional microphones. So please be patient and kind about the Zoom quality for audio. We are working on fixing that this coming year. But we just hope that you guys enjoy Amanda as much as we did.
Hello, Amanda Cooley. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you both?
Well, the gang's all here.
Look who showed up for you.
I love it.
Parker's here today. This is Amanda. Is his auntie?
Yes. Fond feelings for Auntie Amanda. So we're really excited to have you. This has been something that we've planned for a while now. We polled our patrons and our listeners, and they are wanting healthy, active lifestyle tools. And we thought, let's bring Amanda in right afterwards to talk about something that's extremely important to our health. And that is?
And that is yoga.
Amazing.
And Amanda, you've mentioned this before in other conversations, because we've had you on the show on Coffee with the Sarlos. But I think you've mentioned prior, and I'd like you to bring it up again. Who created yoga?
Well, it stems from India, and I would say that a male-dominated society created yoga, but ultimately the sages or the gurus created yoga. Okay. So that's kind of a loaded question, because nobody really knows where the texts came from. It was from my understanding, it was verbally passed down through traditions, and then men started to document it.
Okay, so I want to pause here for a second, because you knowingly use the term yoga to refer to the 8 limbs, and most people who'll be listening today use yoga to refer to only one of the limbs. And I think that's important to clarify right off the bat, so people aren't like, well, it's stretching, who cares who created it?
Right.
So can you walk us through kind of briefly, because I know we're going to dive into that over the next 5 days.
Yeah, we're definitely going to dive into that. And yeah, and you know what? It's funny because when I was kind of when you asked me to do this, and I stepped back and I thought about setting it up for these 5 days and what I really wanted to focus on, stretching or the postures was not. It's not heavily focused,
Great.
because that's what everybody thinks of. And so, what I really want to focus on in the next 5 days, and of course, we will touch on the postures because postures help us release energy and move energy, and is really good for our body, but all the other aspects of yoga or living yoga. And so, that's what we're going to talk about today.
Live
And then, go ahead.
living yoga.
Yeah,
I really
living
like
yoga.
that. Yeah, because as we mentioned, people want healthy ways of living, and they think about the asanas and think, okay, cool, got it, or no, that's not for me, but don't think about that a healthy way of living is the 8 limbs itself.
So hold on. For the people who don't know what that means when she says the asanas, could you explain what the asanas is?
Yeah, it's the postures, the movements.
Okay. So like
Yeah,
if somebody says, "Oh, do you mean downward dog?" Oh, do you mean, because those are the most common ones, right? Is
that's
that
correct.
correct?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say that that's probably what a lot of people's minds go to, is that image of downward dog. That is one posture out of hundreds of postures. It's basically just a movement for our body. And asana or postures is heavily focused on nowadays, and we forget about all the other awesomeness that yoga can bring to our life.
Okay.
Okay, so we're essentially handing this week over to you to structure in any way that you see fit to present it to
Great.
people. So where do you want to start?
So I want to start with the first limb of the 8 limbs, which in sort of English terms, and I'm gonna do my best to stick to English terms because for the most part I can't really pronounce the Sanskrit words, and I also think that for a white woman such as myself, I don't know if I'm damaging the Indian Hindu culture by basically butchering the Sanskrit terminology. So I'm just going to stick with the English version of things.
Okay, cool
I'm
awareness.
also going to I'm also going to stress that I'm in no I am not a master of the 8 limbs of yoga by any means. These are the little, I'll say, like all the little cherries that I picked off the tree that my teachers brought into my life, and just how I've interpreted or brought it forth, and sort of practice it or implement it on in my day-to-day actions. So, and I want to stress that because you and your audience can also cherry pick from what I give. There's no right way of doing it. And I'm really hoping that in the next 5 days together, that the three of us can just honestly have a conversation about what these might mean in our culture now and what we're living now, as opposed to centuries ago when they sort of were written down by men.
Very cool. I also wanted to back up too and say, like, maybe this is just a BF brag here, is that the way that you have chosen to cherry pick from the 8 limbs, you've done such a beautiful job incorporating in the way that you teach the 1 limb, which is the asanas, to help people understand how to take it into their day-to-day lives, not just in a posture, but in embodying it in different ways. So I think I think that's one of the reasons that you have such a dedicated following, that people will follow you no matter where your studio ends up or where you end up as a person, because of how much you have studied, lived it, and pruned it.
Okay.
Trying to
Thank
stick
you.
with one metaphor.
Thank you. You know what? Something that I really like, and you guys have been talking a lot about that lately, is process.
Mm,
And what I love is how yoga can be a process. And if we forget little parts, we have to step back. We have to go back to like the first or the second, or the steps involved in order to sort of follow that process. And that's if we're thinking about asana or postures, um, and we're bringing in all those other limbs of yoga, process for asana is super important. and we can talk about that, on the third day when I want to talk a little bit more about asana and stuff. So.
All right. Day one, take it away.
Hey, day one. So the first limb of yoga is for English purposes, basically moral codes or an external way of living. However, when these and it's broken down into 5 different words or 5 different phrases or 5 different thought processes. And when they were presented to me in, let's say, my philosophy class back in teacher training, I never really thought about them being only external. And we can talk about that too. So I'm going to just tell you what they are. So if we think moral codes or an external way of living, we want to think about, I have my notes, so I keep looking down, but we think about nonviolence. We think about truthfulness. We think about non-stealing. We think about non-access or excess. And we also think about non-possessiveness. So those are the 5 sort of external ways, moral codes, yamas, that first limb of yoga. They're really broken down into those 5 things.
Cool. This is going to be so loaded, and maybe some of our longer episodes for sure, because my head can go in a lot of different directions when you just say one of them. Can you repeat the first one? Oh
yeah, you know what? I love it. I want to repeat the first 2 because they dance very well together.
Yeah.
And that is nonviolence and truthfulness.
Okay. This is just so fun because I think about truthfulness and how it's been really spun lately, especially in the Western world. I think the Eastern world is in as much chaos, if not more, in their own way, where truthfulness has somehow, with this moral compass, swung to being defined as an opinion. And we put truths, quote unquote, on the internet. We put truths in our posts, and we think because we think it, it's true, or because we want it, it's true. And so you can totally see how these moral compasses across all of our cultures and societies is just, there's no true north.
I like how you said, just because it's in our opinion, we think it's true. Because that's one of the biggest ones that I see in social media, for as little as I'm on it. People think that just because they have a thought or an opinion of something, that they have to express it, that they're supposed to express it, it's their right to express it, and that it's correct.
Which goes against nonviolence. Because if we're not just thinking about nonviolence in terms of physical, we've done a lot of harm to ourselves as well as one another and our society as a whole. I want to say harming the world with our narcissism.
Oh God,
I have to express everything. I have to have a thought about everything. I have to make people think what I think as well.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that plays a big part in kind of what you're saying about speak your truth. Well, you can do that in a kind way, but we've lost that kindness as well. So it goes back to, non-harming or non-violence always trumps truth.
Oh, I love that.
It really does. Yeah. And so if we want to speak our truth, we can absolutely do that. We got to have the tools to do it in a very kind way.
So good already.
Yeah. So those 2 dance together. And I mean, I wrote down a little bit of notes just for myself, because really nonviolence, if we think about violence in and of itself and where that comes from, where it stems from, well, it comes from fear, as we know. And so in order for us to be nonviolent, we really have to be courageous. We have to tap into courage in ourselves in order to sort of diminish our fear or recognize where our fear is coming from and really understand ourselves on a deeper level and where our fear comes from.
So we don't confuse survival instinct with speaking our truth.
Absolutely. Yeah. So those, go ahead. Sorry, Karen.
I was just going to say that we've really become a very violent society. And they don't just mean the wars that are being fought. I mean, the verbal wars being fought every day on social media, the verbal wars within our own homes, just even text messaging another person. If we really want to get down to really simple things, the way that we text message,
The way that we talk to ourselves,
the emojis that we use,
Perfect.
the
Yeah.
little gifts that we send. Like,
Yeah.
I just think, because I've just learned how to send a gift.
Oh my God.
took a couple tries, but we got
I
there.
did. But
My
just,
first one.
but just saying that we're looking for so many ways to express violence, to express our anger, instead of
Yeah.
learning healthy ways to do it. And as you said, coming back to the gentleness, even if we don't like somebody, we can still be gentle because we choose to be for ourselves, not because we necessarily choose to be for them or they deserved it, but because we choose it because that's how we choose to live our own life.
Absolutely. 100%. And Kelly, I love what you said about, nonviolence to self too, because again, when all these concepts were being presented to me for these specific five, it is a moral code, or they really sort of set an external way of living, but it really can be about harming to self as well, like how you speak to yourself, how you treat yourself, what you intake, what you avoid, all those things, right? So yes, we want to think about how we treat others, but we also really want to think about how we treat ourselves as well.
And it's no longer built into the fabric of our societies because parents are not taught to facilitate this.
Yeah.
If you think about, communities, villages raising each other, where it was really focused around health and healing and community by definition, we raised our children to know themselves. We raised our children to feel like they were a part of something rather than pushing down any big feeling they had, ignoring the big feelings and discouraging expression. So much of what parents are doing now, for maybe lack of knowledge or lack of example, is shut the child down, and then they never grow up to actually know what they think, what they feel, and what to do with that suppression, hence the anger and the violence to self and externally.
So it brings us, like, all of what you're saying kind of brings us to the next three, and I'm going to relist them again. So non-stealing, non-excess, and non-possessiveness. So you said some really nice things there, because where I went with that is, particularly with children, is a parental figure, whatever that might be, is really stealing from the growth of the child.
Oh,
right? Non-stealing. Sorry, Karen, what'd you say?
I was going to say that there are so many kinds of stealing, and I'm glad that you're going to go into what stealing can look like.
Yeah, absolutely. So the stealing from the child, that example that Kelly brought up, stealing from self-growth, right? If you're not being true, if you're not finding your courage, if you're not seeking out what you're afraid of, and also stealing from the earth.
Yeah, and we're on
Stealing
fire,
from the earth, for sure. Well, we all know what we all know what the earth is going through these days. Turn on the news and turn on the Weather Channel, and you can see it everywhere. So
when you say stealing from the earth, Amanda, I think about how we're always using up its resources when you say stealing from it, that we don't take from it and then replenish back. Or maybe some people do, and they're listening to this day going, no, I participate in planting trees. No, I took down 2 on my property and I put up a new one. Like, want to say good job to the people that are doing it.
Yeah.
But we also want to say it's easy enough to find where we're taking from it and not giving back anymore.
100%.
And then cultures raise their children and behave that way, that when you take, you give back.
Yes, 100% they have.
Can I go in a different direction with stealing?
Yeah.
I want to go in a happy direction, but I don't want to take away. I have movable arms. This is not good. I just went flying. I want to take stealing in the direction of artists, because this is where I'm seeing where it's done beautifully.
Yes.
And there's literally a book that I would highly encourage people to check out, Steal Like an Artist. And especially for an entrepreneur, right? This is where they actually talk about innovation, in other words, where I can see something that you have done, love it, and know how I want to put a twist on it to make it different, better, more accessible, fill a need, let's say. And stealing becomes this really beautiful thing that it's just passed around, and no one is upset that you took it and built upon it. So it's not where I feel that someone has stolen from me. We can see how we continue to build on what other people have started. And I absolutely love that. But that's part of the replenishing too, is I don't want to say giving thanks, because I think that sounds a little bit cliche. But offering appreciation that, hey, you loved that thing I did and worked with it. That's so cool. And we do see that in Hollywood very much on, you know, all of the audition shows where people are building on dances and songs and works of art to keep creating, where artists honor each other for what they've done. And I just really love that.
Yeah, even like on a music level too, right? The guitars, musicians, yeah, absolutely. And I think if you go back to that nonviolence, again, nonviolence trumps it, right? So if you can be so elated that somebody else is finding value of what you have not even started, because who knows what started anything really, but just sort of like snowballed. That's beautiful. That's a way of nonviolence, and just being enraptured with the creation is so awesome. And it also comes to that fourth phrase of, or that fifth phrase of non-possessiveness, right? Where you don't cling to the control, or you don't cling to that feeling of, oh, it's mine, or they are mine. And I know nowadays in our culture, minimalism is a huge topic. Is it Marie Kondo as well, where you're decluttering and stuff, right? People really living sort of in a simple way. That's that act of non-possessiveness, right? You can.
Well, and I think, you know, evaluating joy was her really big thing, as well as I can't remember their names, but they did the minimalism documentary.
I can picture their faces.
I know. I even know the director's name, but not them. But they talk about evaluating joy, which I think comes back to that truthfulness. It comes back to that nonviolence, right? Like, there's not one thing on that shelf behind me that I don't see every day and love and feel like it provides something in the room to make it feel full in a wonderful way, rather than cluttered or like I'm just taking up space, right? Which again is going to be stealing from the earth, stealing from my time, stealing from my space, if that's something that I include in it. Yeah.
That sort of non-access to, right? Paring it down. It was interesting when this phrase was brought sort of into the conversation of when I first learned it. It was really stressed as abstinence. But more importantly, abstinence from sexual pleasure. And I thought that was really interesting, because I mean, you can go off on things like that right now, in many different ways, of how you could take it to a negative level of where, you know, maybe for a person who really uses sex as a tool to get what they want, maybe that could be something that they could look at, where they fear, there's a fear in them, and there's a lack of control, and so they feel like this is the only way that they can gain control. But they could think about like non-access in abstinence in that way, or sexual pleasure in that way. But the other way, or the positive way, is, you know, how many women are being empowered nowadays with speaking up about how they've been abused. So it's an interesting phrase in there. I think in abstinence, not just sexually. I think about it in all the other ways as well. of abstinence from, that extra chocolate that I eat at night that I probably shouldn't be eating,
Mhm.
or, shoving my face full of, a bag of chips. So
So
everything in moderation.
yeah, and then it's coming back to self-regulation, which is nonviolence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I
Yeah.
love that.
I find it wildly fascinating, and not in a fun way,
Mm.
um, how so many of these cults, cultures, religions, whatever you want to refer to them as, especially born from men, say that they practice such a suppression of sexual health. It makes no sense to me, because I think that is something that creates violence. It's something that creates a lack of truth. It's something that puts you in dysregulation, which you're more likely to want to binge on, um, or use inappropriately or disproportionately, when there isn't a healthy understanding of what it can do for you, how it can bring you joy, and how it can be done truthfully and respectfully.
We've certainly
Yeah. And
seen that.
then, yeah, bang, bingo, like so good. I think that a lot, there can be a really negative outlet as well, if you're, drugs, drinking, or even an what do they call it? They call it sex addicts these days. An over abundance of where you're just not really caring about the other person or the other people, or
That's a
yeah,
disconnection.
yeah, disconnection. Yeah, I said
I know.
disconnection.
I'm gonna leave in a disconnection. Thank you, Freud. Um, this is great. I'm really excited. I know this is the free one and it's going out to the public. I'm really excited for patrons who are in our tier that are going to get reflective questions this month, because I think just this show alone, there can be so many questions reflecting on the 5 things that we've started talking about. They can probably be prepared to be inundated with more things they're going to need to journal and explore for themselves.
Yeah, and there was one more thing about violence, and this was when I took violence, and I'm just again going to my notes, but when I took violence, this is the one thing that I focused on for a week. And I'm just going to read it out loud here, but nonviolence asks us to trust another's ability to find the answers they are seeking. So instead of, and I had a really bad habit of trying to fix or over worry about somebody else's situation or something that they were going through. And I wanted to step in and offer them suggestions and do this and do that and just like coddle them. And I really think that perhaps that could be a question for the general population or the general patrons at this point is, how are you taking away from somebody else's experience? How are you not allowing them to grow, not allowing them to find their own, in a good way, their own truth or their own growth or their own fears? And it kind of pulls all of those 5 concepts into one question.
Perfect. I think we're off to a really good start. And I know that we're jamming 8 limbs in 5 days. So please bear with us, patrons who are gearing up for the rest of the week. And anyone who wants to join us, please feel free to do so.
Yes. Thank you. It's been fun. I can't wait to come back tomorrow.
Me too. I love this. And I love how it's applying to our everyday lives now. Instead of thinking that parts of yoga, we just go to class, we stretch, and we really don't understand what we're doing or how it's actually supposed to affect our lives. So thank you for bringing those teachings to us.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening to Sips of Sanity. Catch the full monthly series on patreon.com/by Sarlo.